All right, thank you very much. I'm going to talk about transformational experiences. I'd love to think about the relationship that Games for Change has to the world at large. It's something we think about a lot around the Entertainment Technology Center, and I've been sort of talking with Games for Change about it. Around the ETC, when we talk about transformational experiences, we mean design for impact. You want to try to use your creativity for the greater good. Can you actually make changes in our daily lives, whether it's through health, helping people with behavior modification or education, or just civic awareness, getting people out to vote or understand their rights or issues. A great example for this, when we think about games specifically, is when you're doing transformational game design and trying to think of a game, the things that you have to think about when you're making the game, any old game, are important. The goals you want the players to think about, the challenges you set to them so that it's not just a boring old tic-tac-toe type game, the rewards they get for accomplishing these challenges need to be layered on with the motivations they have to get at the deeper content that are above and beyond and outside of the game. How do you assess that they're actually having an impact and that people are understanding what you hope to communicate, what you hope to have some sort of impact on them, and create those transformations. So it all of a sudden becomes a much more complex experience for people to consider. In a very simple way, I like to think about it in terms of learning. When you're trying to think about where people are in their learning curve, say it's math, and they're learning multiplication. Some students will be at the beginning of that, and they're really struggling with multiplication. Some students are starting to get it, and some students are like, multiplication, yawn, I've got it down. But you're trying to make a game for students to learn how to do some math, multiplication. So then you have to think about their ability in terms of gameplay. Somebody might be sort of new to games. In this day and age, that's getting less and less frequent. Almost all of us are players in one way or another. Some of us are players of the game of life and do it very well. Or are they just a casual player, somebody who plays so much that they get bored pretty quickly if the game's not giving us some challenges? So then again, if you're thinking about that, you have to start layering in a game that can help address that across all of your players. That's a hard nut to crack in terms of both the subject matter you're hoping to communicate and creating an engaging experience for a game that has a variety of players. And then think if you're trying to use it in the classroom or the context, like Mary Flanagan, who justly won an award last night. She's done a lot of work about the context of how you try to have these games for impacts and these games for change is equally important. Whether it's in school, out of school, how you contextualize that. We believe in this enough that we're actually supporting part of the ETC is the ETC Press, and we're working with Shell Games. If Jesse Shell was out there and you need to go see Shell Games and ETC, we have booths up in the marketplace. But Sabrina Solba, one of the lead game designers at Shell Games, is taking the lead on this book on a field guide for thinking about how to create transformational games. So that's going to be out hopefully soon. I've seen the book and she's almost done, but she's tinkering with it. So hopefully it'll be out shortly. But when you think about all of this, you're really thinking about the experience. That's what we preach around the ETC, is like you want to design for the experience that the user, the guest, the player has. So this goes above and beyond just good game design. It's like, how do you create something like for theme parks? How do you create something for a short film? How do you create something for a mobile experience where people are able to walk around? They might get phone calls while they're on it, because that never happens. But thinking about those design challenges that you got there, you're really thinking about the experience you hope that we have, and you can design for that. You can design for those types of experiences that you'd like for us to have. We sort of stole this from Disney. We talk about it as the making of the magic. When you're trying to create something that's new and useful and good, and it has that little extra special sauce to it that gets people really engaged, gets people really excited, gets people really immersed. It's like following that design process and really problem solving, but being critical about what you're trying to create, not just sort of stepping back. I'm sure a lot of you, we're in Parsons, and I know a lot of the people here teach games or work around with students, and cannot tell you how many times we have students going, well, I think the game's awesome. And the kids are just the wrong group of kids. It's like, oh, if you're blaming the kids, you're off bait. Don't never blame the user. Think about how you want to create that experience. And if the kids don't get your game, then they're probably more right than you are. They're not the dumb kids. You just give me the smart kids. So part of making the magic is really, again, digging into that experience, thinking above and beyond just the game. Like, how do you have that experience? And at the Entertainment Technology Center, that's part of our strength, I think. We focus across the board on a variety of entertainment technologies. So, of course, games, they're hot and popular right now. I've heard that VR is coming back. Interestingly enough, for the last 20 years, we've been teaching a class called Building Virtual Worlds. It's interesting now that reality's catching up with us. It used to be like, oh, we do this VR thing. It's kind of crazy. You've never done it before. It's getting hard to say that's true. And I'm like, what, 5 or 6 years ago, it was sort of like, oh, we do this motion tracking stuff. Nobody does that. And I was like, connects in everybody's living room. But that's part of the challenge is like, thinking about that and trying to push yourselves. And like we try to push our students, we want to be leaders in the field, not just in terms of, taking responsibility for our roles there, but also like pushing the field to do new and better things. A big part of that we've discovered, and I've given plenty of talks about this, is around diversity and inclusion. We've had a lot of research done on how we engage in projects and have our students do games and theme park installations and stuff like that. And one of the things that's come out of it is if we have diverse teams, they actually do better work, and they actually do more diverse work. And so something we push really, really hard is like thinking about that. And it's not just thinking about, women to men, international diversity, age range of diversity, experience of diversity. It's also thinking about, it might be good if you're on a team trying to think about games that you're making it for like kids in a classroom and this teacher might do it. Put somebody on that team who doesn't really love games. Like we get students who are like, is it okay that I don't like games? That's not my interest. And I was like, oh my God, banned. But no, of course it's okay. Like that's part of the mix. And part of it is like having those people bring that experience in, because if all you know is games, you're gonna make games like games have always been made. So if you have experiences outside of that, that's what I think is really passionate and interesting as you start pulling in, like Ralph Latuccio, who gave a talk yesterday on VR, he teaches a filmmaking class that all of our students have to go through. And it's not so that they become the next, Steven Spielberg, or he would probably say, oh, that's Hollywood. No, he challenges them to be artists in their films. But it's really about thinking about storytelling and thinking about how the visuals and the language of cinema can make something more engaging, immersive, which could help you with your games, which could help you with your theme park installation, help you with a mobile experience. And when we talk about collaboration, this is sort of what we hope happens. It's a co-creative process where you have a bunch of people involved. So if you're doing something for a classroom, get the teachers there, get the students there. You're never gonna have a game work if the teachers think that they're never gonna use it. But if you start like working, like we did a project with the Small Lab. Are people familiar with the Small Lab? Small Lab is Situated Media and Learning Lab. It was started out of ASU. It's now a little company. It's kind of like Connect on steroids. It makes a room where they know exactly where like up to, I think, 6 people are in the room, and they can track them in space, and you project down on the floor, and kids can play games. They've done a lot of research of having that be a remediative activity where students will take a math class and then come in and play a math game that sort of helps them practice what they were just learning in class. And they've shown that sort of embodiment right after sitting down in classroom thinking about it helps students retain the knowledge. So we were getting it in, like Pittsburgh now is probably one of the areas that they probably have a dozen small labs in all the school districts around the city. But the first school district that got one, the superintendent thought it was a great idea. The teachers were like, whatever. You're wasting our time. We don't want to do this. And it took us a whole year collaborating with the teachers, having our students work with the teachers like co-creative designers, as opposed to a client who really didn't want a small lab. And now, because of that, the teachers started coming around. I'd say in that second semester, we started having teachers have interest in going like, oh my gosh, this could be useful for me. I see what you're doing. And you actually are trying to make something that I understand and can use with my kids and my students. And now, like the small lab's so popular in that school district, there's a waiting list to get your kids in there to play the games. A great example of this, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about it, Never Alone. Have people played Never Alone? Eli Media and the Cook Inlet Tribal Council created this game, and I think it's a great example of a co-creative process where they're like, Eli, up front, it's like, we have no expertise in what you're hoping to cover with this game. And the tribal council's like, that's our life, that's our culture. And Alan's given great talk, Alan Gershenfeld from Eli, has given some great talks about it. It took up to 6 months for the two teams to try to trust each other. People coming out of the tribe and the game designers. And it has to go both ways, because I know a lot of us who are designers or work in the creative field, sometimes people are like, okay, you're gonna be the person I tell what to do, as opposed to, I'm gonna respect your, you understand game design, you understand games, let's collaborate together. Because a lot of people think they can make a good game. It's so hard. So they did a wonderful job. It took up to 6 months, but the team came together, so they're hoping now to do what they call World Games. And the tribal council spun off a company called Upper One Games up there in Alaska. And they're doing what they call World Games, where they're trying to think about these culturally intensive games. And they realize they're gonna have to put at least 6 months in to try to get people to start trusting each other so they can do something together. And I think that's really important in terms of thinking about trying to create experiences. So we believed in it so much. Last year, at the Entertainment Technology Center, we did a Transformational Experience Summit. And it was like, we were like, that's our sweet spot. We do so many things. Why don't we have like a lot of people come? And we had like, oh, so much fun. We had somebody talking about cooking and what it's like to open a restaurant in a neighborhood and how that can have an impact on your community. We had people talking about games, of course, but people talking about what they're doing in classrooms. People talking about toys they're building, playgrounds they're building. What it matters to have like a community center in an area. And so we were just really interested in trying to focus on this really broadly. And a big part of that summit was also doing a game jam, but we called it a transformational jam, and it became coined the Now I Get It Jam. It was sort of inspired by explorable explorations. People familiar with that? That of using like interactivity just to explain a concept so you can go through it again and again and again until you understand it. And so that started the inspiration. And then when Mark DeLora did the White House Game Jam, and I thought he did a really clever job, before the jam ever happened, he got teachers involved. So this was an educational game jam, and there were teachers, and they worked with Mark and his staff to say, here are the subjects we're struggling with. So those became the design constraints for the game designers who were going to show up for a weekend. And then the teachers were there all weekend. So they collaborated with the game designers, and the work just really worked. I think there's a fluency that came out of those games that was really impactful, and we were like, let's do something like that. And it didn't have to be a game. We called it Now I Get It. So it's like that aha moment, like you're trying to explain something. So we did the same thing. And you can go look, all the games are playable up on, that was one of the requirements, is they had to have a playable at nowigetitjam.org. And we like had the UN trying to talk about universal equality. We had as a client for the jam, and they were there. We had some teachers trying to think about how can we help parents understand Common Core math so they can help their kids with homework. Because Common Core math is crazy. And so but that was one of the topics. HCI design for teens. One of the games was, a guy going, can we talk about sexual harassment in high school, and try to make a game, and they had experts there. And so the jammers got together with these experts, and they really tried to create interactive little moments to create insights and develop, like we talked a lot about, empathy. So at Games for Change, something that they've done recently, I thought, that was interesting and been watching two cultures that are kind of different but sort of rubbing on each other in interesting ways. They started partnering with Tribeca. And I know some people are like, oh, ever since Tribeca, Games for Change has gone downhill. I disagree. I think it's caused some interesting friction, but also I think one of the things that came out of that study about diversity at the ETC is by having diverse teams, they'll do better work, but they're going to have more conflict. But that conflict's creative sparks. And you can have those creative sparks, and they can lead to something you wouldn't have done otherwise. So I think by having like Tribeca and Games for Change rub on each other, it's going to grow both organizations in interesting ways. So they did some really nice stuff where last 2 years they kind of partnered, and they did a little summit earlier this year. And I think it's like getting these cultures together to talk about it. And was anybody at Killscreen like 2-3 weeks ago, the Killscreen Festival over in Brooklyn? I was there, and like they're like the arts and culture and games, trying to do like a New Yorker, and every talk was somebody from the game field and somebody from somewhere else. And the talks, when they worked, they were very fruitful. And Jamin Warren, who's awesome MC, was emceeing it to keep things on track. You'd have this really fruitful talk where like a set designer for television was talking about an environmental artist, and they were talking about their field and how it builds and how creatively they're very similar but also distinct. But sometimes it could devolve into like the person from TV had no idea how games were made. And the session became like this games 101. Like one person on stage was like, it must be so easy in games. Everything's digital. You can do whatever you want. And the person was like, well, we have budgets. We have timeline. Every object there had to be made, so we had to make decisions. And she's like, oh, I didn't think about that. I thought digital meant everything. And this person was all physical. It's like we were literally limited by what we could fit in the room. The digital art's like kind of the same thing. And so it was like substantive conversations were kind of happening though. So here at Games for Change, one of the things that we were talking about is like, could we do something transformational, thinking about experiences above and beyond games? And that was sort of the challenge. I'm sure some of you went to Ralph's talk. It was the first time we'd done a Well Played. It's a session that we often host here at Games for Change that focuses on the games in the festival or games in this field and how they work, and trying to unpack, is this game actually a good game? Is this game actually having an impact that you would hope it would have if you're trying to say it's a game for change? And with Ralph's session, we were like, well, what if we do VR? Because there's this thing happening. Who knows why? Because VR, what the hell? But so one of our sessions this year was on VR, not a game. And today's session is going to be on That Dragon Cancer. I highly recommend everybody see that. It's going to be fun. It's Nick, and he's always so positive. And also, we've often partnered with Games for Change to do a game for the festival. And if you remember previous festivals, we were like out in Washington Park playing stuff. But this year, what we tried to do is we're doing a theatrical experience. So it's going to be combining technology, live actors doing some improv. We as a crowd will be able to pass them stuff. So it's really trying to pull in a theatrical experience into Games for Change. Highly recommend that. It's going to be later today, supposedly around 3, but who knows. It's called Give Me Your Gun. Sorry. An interactive theater game where we'll, like, everybody bring your phones. I'm sure you have smartphones, yes? You'll use them, you'll be able to like impact it. And it's going to talk about gun control, which is fascinating as our team was all international. There wasn't anybody from the States on the team. And they're like, wow, the United States has interesting opinions about guns. Who knew? Anyway, so you could tell they're just sort of like culturally mind blown. And also the 3 tracks is sort of new for Games for Change. And the idea of trying to pull in, like, Adam Ghazali's in here. He's coming from neuroscience, and that's a hot thing. But that also, like I was talking to John Sharp earlier, looking at these variety of ways that are providing context for us that give us new inlets into games, but also provide like constraints about how we think about games. So it opens it up. It can also kind of shut us down when we have conversations. And that's what's interesting about having people mix it up and having people from all over. But it can also be with some of the limitations. And then it devolves into Games 101. I remember when we used to literally have a Games 101 here at Games for Change. And like a lot of documentary filmmakers would come and they would attend, and a couple designers would give them a quick little workshop on how games are made. And I felt like we were doing damage, because then the filmmakers would walk out going, I know how to make a game now. And I was like, ooh, maybe a little. And so to me, it's sort of like as you open that up and bring things that are above and beyond games and thinking about experiences at large and then pulling them back in the games, that's only going to make the games more enriching and more experience. And like, as you look at the games that were in the festival this year and in past years, I mean, then we're in our 13th year now. So in some ways, there's no surprise that games can tackle interesting topics, diverse, crazy, weird topics. And now the sort of challenge is like making sure that those things are interesting, valuable, encouraging, that they actually have an impact. Like I saw like an email list where they're like, okay, there's still a debate on whether games teach or not. And then somebody will wait and go, no, I've got all this research that games actually are better than teachers in a classroom. And then this is an academic list. So that was a really interesting comment to spur like 60 replies. And but still, I think that type of tension and rubbing of having people come together is a really good thing and fruitful for both the field at large, for Games for Change as a festival, and like for us as designers and what we're talking about. So then it boils down to me, like transformational experiences is making media that matters, whether it's a game. Because sometimes for us, when we work with clients, it's like, are you sure you want a game? Maybe it would be better to have a film. Maybe that's going to be more fruitful. Maybe like a short book or an interactive piece, maybe just a website or something that's, like an explorable explanation will be more impactful than trying to make a game. But, games are hot and sexy. And then right now it's like VR. VR is going to solve everything. It's like, really? Are you sure you want VR? Maybe you don't, because nobody looks good when they're doing a VR experience. None of us. Be ready. And like Jesse brought up a good point. If you're doing VR in a public space, please make sure they wipe off that thing before you put it on your face. Because I'm a sweaty mess, and I have pink eye. No, I don't. But somebody in this room does. No. So anyways, thinking about transformational, wow, I got off topic. I'm going to end on that note. Thank you very much.